Federal agents leaned over a small receiver while a steady voice drifted out, carrying quiet instructions toward streets he had not walked in decades. The room stayed cold while that old voice asked for updates on 47th Street, sounding like someone still shaping movements far beyond his concrete walls. ADX Florence sat silent around him, yet whole crews across Chicago still reacted whenever his name surfaced. The agents listened carefully as he adjusted his glasses and continued speaking like nothing inside that cage could slow him. Something heavy sat behind every word he shared, and nobody in that room missed it. That voice belonged to Larry Hoover, a kid from Chicago's South Side who rose into something unforgettable. Larry Hoover reached Chicago as a small child carried from Mississippi into a city stacked with pressure on every block. His family settled in the South Side during a period shaped by tight segregation and limited paths for kids trying to find their footing. The neighborhoods moved fast with unrest, and young people often learned survival before they learned anything else. Chicago's South Side in the 60s held strict lines that separated communities, and those boundaries shaped the environment that raised Hoover. Hoover learned the streets early while watching older boys move with confidence through alleys full of tension. He figured out very quickly that presence mattered in neighborhoods where respect never came free. His sharp instincts drew people toward him, since many kids his age trusted anyone who showed clever thinking under pressure. He dropped out of school around 13 and stepped directly into street circles, running across different sections of the South Side. These circles respected quick decisions and a calm mind, and Hoover built both skills while observing everything around him. Neighborhood crews often searched for someone who could help them avoid reckless decisions, and Hoover stepped into that role without forcing anything. His voice carried weight among other teenagers who wanted someone steady to follow. Those early years taught him that confidence carried influence, and influence built opportunity in places offering very few chances. Street cliques drifted across several blocks, and alliances shifted depending on which crews controlled certain corners. Hoover understood how to navigate those tensions while keeping himself valuable to people who needed guidance. He eventually linked up with a group known as the Supreme Gangsters, a young crew looking for direction and structure. They moved across areas near 68th and Union, trying to carve out territory while staying aware of older, more aggressive sets nearby. Hoover entered quietly and earned trust through smart decisions that kept the crew steady when conflicts threatened them. When things got loud, he never panicked, which helped his reputation grow inside that circle. His steady personality convinced many teenagers that following him offered a safer route through the dangers surrounding them. Hoover's influence expanded as he offered protection, strategy, and consistency to kids looking for guidance. He encouraged discipline inside the crew, creating a loose structure that gave younger members a feeling of belonging. The Supreme Gangsters appreciated direction in a world full of unpredictable moves, and Hoover delivered that leadership with calm authority. His quiet decisions built unity, and unity built strength that other crews soon recognized on nearby blocks. The teens around him relied heavily on his judgment, since most wanted a leader who made rational decisions instead of emotional ones. Chicago's gang environment in the 60s shifted constantly, with numerous small sets claiming blocks and creating rivalries tied to history and survival. Some groups controlled single corners, while others stretched across multiple streets depending on their connections. These territorial lines shaped Hoover's early strategy, since he understood that scattered power created unnecessary conflict. He observed how many crews fought each other over small issues, and he absorbed those lessons while thinking ahead. His mind drifted toward unification long before he had the power to push anything large. During these years, Hoover survived several attempts on his life, including shootings that forced him to react quickly without losing control. Many teenagers in that era got caught in crossfire during territorial disputes, though Hoover always managed to escape with his composure intact. Those incidents built an aura around him, since surviving targeted attacks in Chicago during that era carried significant weight. Young members within the Supreme Gangsters started viewing him as someone with unusual resilience, which strengthened his authority inside the group. Those experiences hardened his thinking and sharpened his instincts for leadership. The South Side's tangled gang layout taught Hoover that scattered factions weakened themselves by clashing over blocks too small to justify the bloodshed. He studied this pattern while planning ways to strengthen his own organization through unity instead of reckless aggression. The idea of merging crews floated in his mind long before anyone else considered it possible. Older boys usually chase quick dominance, while Hoover valued long-term stability built through alliances. This mindset separated him from other young leaders focused on immediate victories rather than sustainable influence. Chicago during the 60s functioned like a vast patchwork of tribal divisions, where each group held its own codes, colors, and grudges. Every block carried its own identity, and every crew protected that identity fiercely. Hoover moved through these spaces with a rare combination of awareness and patience, choosing when to engage and when to step back. He recognized that real power required more than toughness. It required organization, loyalty, and strategic cooperation across multiple territories. By the time Hoover reached his late teens, his reputation had spread across several neighborhoods, and other crews began noticing his ability to guide people without raising his voice. He carried himself like someone who understood the streets better than his age suggested. His thinking pushed him toward bigger visions, while many around him stayed trapped in small block disputes. Those early years revealed something significant about him. He already saw how fragmented gang culture created endless cycles of retaliation, and he believed unity could create something larger than traditional crews operating independently. These early instincts formed the foundation for everything he later built. Even before he touched real power, Hoover recognized the value of merging influence to create stronger networks. That idea would eventually shift Chicago's gang landscape permanently, shaping his rise into one of the most impactful street figures in modern American history. Chicago kept shifting while Hoover gained weight inside the Supreme Gangsters, and the late 60s carried heavy tension across the South Side. Rival crews moved with sharp edges, and the Supreme Gangsters clashed repeatedly with David Barksdale's Black Disciples. Those confrontations erupted around 63rd, 67th, and 69th, where young members treated every corner like territory holding real meaning. People from both sets understood that those disputes never stayed small, since each group carried wounded pride and serious ambition. The rivalry grew into something dangerous, and every run-in brought louder pressure on both leaders. David Barksdale held influence that reached from 53rd to extended areas near Stony Island, and people called him King David with real respect. His crew carried discipline that impressed many youths, and Hoover studied those methods whenever stories drifted through neighborhoods. The Black Disciples valued loyalty, organization, and swift responses, and those ideas pushed Hoover to refine his own approach. He watched their structure from a distance, knowing strong systems always outlast loose arrangements. The Supreme Gangsters had spirit, yet they moved without the internal order that Barksdale demanded. By 1969, a sudden shift started forming, though most soldiers never expected anything peaceful between those sides. Chicago carried rumors about a possible meeting between Hoover and Barksdale, and many young members doubted anything positive would come from that conversation. However, both leaders understood that fighting without clear direction drained their crews and weakened their influence. People on the South Side still remember how those two minds sat down and weighed their options carefully. The outcome shocked Chicago, since they agreed to merge their forces under a single banner. That merger created the Black Gangster Disciple Nation, and the entire South Side felt that move instantly. The new organization pulled soldiers from both sets, creating a powerful alliance that stretched across dozens of blocks. Members adopted coordinated signals, handshakes, and internal guidelines, which gave them structure previously missing. Their numbers expanded quickly, as smaller crews aligned themselves with the growing nation for survival and unity. The Black Gangster Disciple Nation presented itself as an emerging powerhouse, and many youths gravitated toward that rising identity. Hoover learned closely from Barksdale, who held tremendous respect among Chicago's street leaders. Barksdale had lived through multiple shootings, and his survival gave him myth-like status across several neighborhoods. He controlled meetings with calm authority, teaching younger members how to protect their influence without reckless decisions. Hoover watched him manage crises, settle conflicts, and speak with gravity during internal gatherings. That mentorship shaped Hoover's strategic thinking, and he used those lessons to refine his leadership style. He positioned himself beside Barksdale with careful patience, avoiding aggressive moves while building respect through consistency. As time passed, Barksdale's health began breaking down after surviving a serious gun attack that left lasting damage. Doctors noted kidney complications, and his declining strength forced him to step back from daily leadership. Members around the nation noticed Hoover taking a larger role, guiding meetings and offering direction when Barksdale needed rest. His presence grew stronger as he quietly shaped the group's growth, earning trust from older lieutenants and newer soldiers. Eventually, Hoover moved into full command out of necessity, holding together a massive organization during uncertain times. Hoover produced a structured chain of command, assigning ranks and responsibilities to members across different neighborhoods. This system kept information organized, and decisions traveled from leaders to foot soldiers without confusion. The group adopted codes of conduct, which expected discipline, respect, and strict loyalty. Violations could bring heavy penalties, so members learned quickly that order held major importance. Hoover also organized early financial systems involving controlled income from street operations that supported leaders. Those funds helped maintain the group's power and strengthen their presence across the South Side. The nation expanded quickly and touched areas stretching from Inglewood to Woodlawn, drawing interest from kids searching for identity. New members offered manpower that increased the group's ability to hold territory across Chicago. Their influence brought rising income streams, which flowed through leaders who kept operations steady. Hoover's structured direction strengthened the organization and gave members confidence in a unified future. Chicago now faced a force shaped through discipline, vision, and calculated leadership. That foundation prepared Hoover for everything that would come later, both inside and outside the streets. The early 70s introduced new pressure inside the Black gangster disciple nation as profits expanded across numerous blocks. Money brought comfort for some members and danger for others, stirring arguments about loyalty and responsibility. Underground income increased after the merger, and internal disputes surfaced more often. Hoover monitored those shifts carefully, since every crew experienced problems when financial gains reached higher levels. Some younger soldiers lacked discipline, creating issues that threatened the leadership's stability. William Pookie Young emerged as one of those troubling situations, since whispers claimed he had taken product and money without permission. Pookie moved around areas near 69th and Union, and several members complained about missing items. His name circulated quickly within conversations among Hoover's lieutenants, and tension rose with every report. Members expected a strict response toward anyone jeopardizing the group's income, and Hoover listened while measuring the damage. Pookie remained a familiar face inside the nation, though doubts about his loyalty increased fast. People around him sensed trouble coming, yet few expected anything extremely serious. Investigations within the crew pointed directly at Pookie, and soon multiple voices confirmed suspicion. Hoover received those findings and decided action needed to follow swiftly. One February night in 1973, members grabbed Pookie and placed him into a waiting vehicle. They took him near an alley around 68th and Union, where the environment stayed quiet. Street stories described Pookie pleading, while members held firm under Hoover's instructions. Gunshots echoed through that alley, leaving Pookie lifeless on cold pavement before anyone nearby understood what happened. That moment altered Hoover's path dramatically, since leadership decisions always carried consequences. People within that community discussed the killing silently, and some whispered about Hoover's involvement. Law enforcement eventually tracked rumors connecting the murder to internal enforcement within the nation. Detectives under the Chicago Police Department increased surveillance toward individuals near Barksdale's older territory. They examined associates linked to Hoover and reviewed movements around the time of the killing. The investigation narrowed toward Hoover and Andrew Howard, who allegedly helped confront Pookie. Authorities placed Hoover under heavy watch while preparing to bring formal charges. Hoover attempted to remain hidden, yet his movement across Chicago remained noticeable. Reports state that officers eventually spotted him driving a stolen car during a routine patrol. After stopping the vehicle, Hoover stepped out and attempted to escape on foot. Officers chased him through nearby streets and managed to tackle him before he reached safety. His arrest gained major attention since authorities believed they had captured a leader tied to organized violence. Prosecutors charged Hoover and Howard with murder connected to Pookie's death. Court proceedings began quickly, and witnesses presented detailed testimonies about the killing. Prosecutors highlighted Hoover's leadership role inside the nation and emphasized his responsibility for maintaining order through violence. Hoover remained steady during trial, though evidence pushed strongly toward conviction. In late 1973, the court found Hoover guilty and issued a severe sentence ranging from 150 to 200 years. He entered Stateville Correctional Center during early 1974, while observers believed his influence had ended. Many Chicago residents assumed the Black gangster disciple nation would collapse without its leader. Hoover's story seemed finished as prison gates closed behind him, and outside voices predicted permanent silence. However, that assumption underestimated Hoover's ability to adapt under difficult circumstances. What looked like a downfall became something far different once he settled inside Stateville. The next stage of his rise developed far from the streets that shaped him, unfolding within concrete walls designed to contain dangerous men. Hoover prepared himself for a new chapter, while Chicago moved forward without understanding what waited ahead. Hoover stepped into Stateville during early 1974, with many people assuming his influence would fade quickly behind those heavy gates. Stateville Correctional Center sat outside Joliet with thick walls and rows of cells holding men with long sentences. Guards expected Hoover to blend into that environment quietly without carrying weight among inmates. Chicago newspapers reported his arrival without suggesting any future impact from him. People outside believed the story had ended, and many members inside the nation doubted he could guide anything from a cage. Stateville carried intense energy during the 70s, and violence shaped many days inside that facility. Inmates clashed often, and rival groups brought street grudges into narrow cell blocks. New arrivals usually struggled to find breathing room inside those tiers, and some lasted only a short time before trouble caught them. Hoover watched the rhythm of that prison carefully and learned how to move without slipping. His calm approach separated him from the loud figures who wanted immediate recognition. Many inmates respected how he stayed controlled while reading people before speaking. Hoover gradually became a stabilizing force among prisoners who desired organization within their situations. His presence helped calm younger inmates who feared unpredictable attacks inside crowded living areas. They appreciated any guidance that helped them understand the power structure in that building. Hoover supplied advice to those who trusted him, and he built relationships that strengthened daily. Stories spread within Stateville about his leadership on the streets, and many inmates valued his history. His name carried weight, and people gravitated towards someone with steady judgment. Gradually, inmates approached Hoover for protection, direction, and a sense of order when chaos surrounded them. Older prisoners encouraged new members of the nation to listen when Hoover spoke. His words influenced living units across several galleries, and crews under the GD banner eventually aligned behind him. Discussions about strategy and unity occurred inside day rooms, and Hoover directed them with measured confidence. That respect shifted the balance inside Stateville, allowing him to shape the environment around him. He created safe pockets for members who needed structure while navigating internal conflict. Hoover started building an internal system that reflected the discipline he valued outside. He introduced codes outlining expectations for loyalty, respect, and conduct inside prison. These instructions formed a foundation for internal culture, which guided members under his umbrella. Literature containing those principles circulated quietly among inmates who wanted direction. Hoover encouraged reading, memorizing, and applying those teachings within daily routines. Violations occurred when members stepped outside the rules, and punishments reinforced order. Penalties ranged from chest hits to organized group discipline, keeping the structure tight. Those routines helped Hoover maintain control, and word traveled across Stateville about the seriousness he required. His internal structure shaped everything from communication to conflict resolution among his followers. Members adopted coordinated signals for private exchanges during movement periods. Meetings occurred discreetly inside yards and cell houses, with Hoover setting agendas. The GDs inside Stateville treated him like someone whose approval determined major decisions. They followed guidelines he created, which strengthened their unity against external pressure. Interestingly, prison officials recognized Hoover's influence and occasionally relied on him when tensions escalated. Guards knew Hoover encouraged order within his ranks, and that stability reduced fights across common areas. When disturbances threatened to break out between rival sets, staff sometimes contacted Hoover indirectly. They wanted him to speak with inmates who listened to his voice. Hoover used those moments to project authority that served both inmates and officials. He never raised his tone, yet his impact remained visible throughout that prison. Officers appreciated calmer units, even if they disliked acknowledging his influence. Stateville continued developing Hoover's leadership since he gained insight into handling internal and external networks simultaneously. He organized an incarcerated board of trusted members who discussed operations relevant to their environment. They managed prison matters including discipline, assistance requests, and movement strategies. Hoover oversaw those meetings and guided decisions that shaped prison order under his command. Meanwhile, he maintained a separate board on the streets consisting of lieutenants who preserved operations across Chicago. That street board handled income, recruitment, neighborhood relations, and long-term growth strategies. Both boards reported upward, and Hoover processed information from two towering power structures. Information entered Stateville through coded notes, discreet conversations, and trusted visitors. Sometimes messages reached Hoover through small paper slips hidden within books passed during movement. Other times, outside lieutenants visited under legitimate names and carried verbal updates. Communication flowed out with similar methods, allowing Hoover to send instructions back into Chicago. Every detail traveled carefully to avoid interception by prison staff. Coded messages helped Hoover remain connected without raising suspicion initially. Members used numerical systems, phrases, and shifting patterns to disguise meaning. Some messages referenced specific corners like 63rd or 75th to signal crew activity. Others used approved words that indicated action without sounding suspicious. Loyal emissaries handled difficult tasks by carrying instructions during visits that looked ordinary from the outside. Hoover learned how to move information through several checkpoints without losing consistency or clarity. Members inside Stateville viewed Hoover as a monarch guiding a kingdom inside concrete boundaries. They recognized how he balanced prison politics, street business, and internal organization with steady focus. His leadership reached far beyond simple influence, constructing an empire that functioned despite confinement. New inmates heard stories describing Hoover's ability to maintain order in unpredictable conditions. They witnessed his presence during yard time when members stood around him quietly. Those moments felt like ceremonial gatherings where people acknowledged his authority with respect. Hoover created a command center within a facility designed to strip inmates of control. His cell became a strategic room where ideas formed and networks strengthened. His power extended from cell blocks to Chicago streets and eventually to other states. Stateville did not weaken him. It sharpened him into a leader capable of running parallel hierarchies with precision. Chicago had leaders with ambition, yet very few managed to run their organizations from inside prison walls. Stateville revealed Hoover's ability to use isolation as a platform for growth instead of decline. He constructed an internal government with rules, roles, and obligations that outlasted shifting leadership on the outside. Inmates treated him as a king figure whose wisdom guided their actions. The GDs felt unified under someone who provided strategy rather than chaos. Hoover's prison leadership demonstrated how influence can survive confinement when loyalty, structure, and communication stay intact. Hoover ruled from behind bars with intelligence, patience, and clear organization. This chapter of his life transformed him into a figure operating within a unique position of authority. He turned Stateville's harsh environment into a headquarters where ideas gained power and followers gained direction. His influence matured inside those walls, preparing him for the next stage of his rise, which would stretch far beyond Stateville's fences. Stateville shaped Hoover into a leader, thinking far bigger than neighborhood turf, and soon he started planning something that stretched past Chicago blocks. He wanted unity among separate groups who held influence across different states. That idea pushed him to build the Folk Nation, which became a powerful alliance connecting multiple gangs under one organized umbrella. Crews like the Imperial Gangsters, the Latin Eagles, and the Maniac Latin Disciples eventually lined up behind this new coalition. Members respected Hoover's vision since they wanted stability, strength, and shared identity during a violent era. The Folk Nation blended signals, sayings, and cultural markers that helped merge those crews without forcing them to lose individuality. Members used upright pitchforks as symbolic tools representing power and loyalty. Hand signs developed into shared language, which helped members recognize allies across unfamiliar neighborhoods. Written codes explained expectations for unity and discipline within every crew under the Folk Nation. Those symbols worked like badges signaling belonging in spaces where alliances mattered heavily. Members respected those signs since they shaped how groups interacted across different cities. Hoover understood symbolism deeply and saw how shared philosophy strengthened communication between groups who never met directly. Those teachings helped crews from separate regions operate with consistent values. Literature distributed inside prisons and neighborhoods carried messages that encouraged coordination and growth. Younger recruits studied that material quietly and followed the teachings during meetings and street movements. That literature gave them guidelines that shaped behavior without requiring constant supervision. The shared culture bonded groups who previously clashed or competed for influence. The Folk Nation structure allowed the gangster disciples to expand far beyond Chicago's South Side. Members wanted stability in other cities, and Hoover's organization offered direction many struggled to find locally. Crews in Milwaukee connected strongly with Hoover's movement and adopted the ideology quickly. Detroit also saw fast expansion as youths embraced the idea of unified strength. In Gary, Indiana, the spread became well known during the late 70s as members followed Chicago teachings. Memphis experienced similar traction, showing Hoover's reach moving into the South. These expansions proved that his influence did not depend on physical presence. People respected the Folk Nation structure since it brought order to cities dealing with chaotic conflicts. Crews under the Alliance adopted rituals and meeting practices, which gave them identity. Those practices helped new members understand their responsibilities without confusion. Neighborhood leaders used Hoover's teachings to guide young recruits during internal discussions. That structure shaped culture in those cities for several years. The Folk Nation united many under one framework that encouraged consistency rather than random violence. Hoover shaped the GD financial system into something more organized than typical street operations. He treated the organization like an enterprise requiring accountability from every member. Leaders handled duties similar to managers, making sure income moved correctly toward designated goals. This structure encouraged discipline since people knew money had specific roots. Hoover expected honesty and calculation among those who managed funds across different neighborhoods. Members recognized that mistakes inside financial operations brought serious consequences. Under Hoover's direction, the GDs established a system called One Day, which functioned as a weekly financial requirement. Every crew under his authority contributed money collected from street activity. Those contributions traveled through designated channels until they reached leadership. Members understood that one-day funds supported internal operations and strengthened the entire structure. The system demanded consistency, and missing payments brought penalties. One day created an economic backbone that allowed the GDs to maintain influence on a large scale. This financial discipline made the GDs more stable than many rival crews in the region. Members operated like workers under a unified organization rather than chaotic street soldiers. Their efficiency impressed other crews who admired Hoover's strategies from a distance. Many understood that Hoover's ability to control finances from prison demonstrated rare leadership. That financial machine helped the GDs organize events, support members, and maintain political connections in Chicago. Those outcomes strengthened Hoover's hold over internal and external networks. Hoover's strategies elevated him beyond typical street leaders, turning him into a thinker with wide influence across several states. He pushed the folk nation concept as a foundation for long-term growth rather than a short-lived alliance. Cities like Omaha, Birmingham, and Cleveland eventually saw groups adopting pieces of the GD ideology. That spread showed how Hoover's ideas traveled far without him leaving Stateville. His teachings reached prisons and communities through loyal followers who respected his leadership. That reach made him an unusual figure, whose guidance moved across regions through shared literature and coded communication. Members believed Hoover offered a clear vision during years when many youths felt lost inside violent environments. His teachings provided structure, which helped crews survive conflict with more organization. Hoover encouraged unity among crews under the alliance, reminding them that cooperation produced strength. Leaders in several cities followed his direction while shaping their own communities. They viewed Hoover as an intellectual force whose ideas created stability where chaos once dominated. That perception increased his influence and expanded his reputation beyond Chicago. Hoover became known as a strategist whose ideas extended without limit, despite incarceration. Stateville failed to restrict his growth since he transformed that environment into a lab for building networks. He saw how separate groups could gain stability by working together instead of acting isolated. His mind traveled beyond physical walls and mapped out plans that reached across the Midwest. Members outside prison felt connected to Hoover through teachings, signs, and structured responsibilities. Those elements built a movement that shaped lives across several states. The folk nation era marked Hoover's evolution from street leader into a visionary guide for thousands. People under his influence operated with structure that rivaled formal institutions. His ideology shaped neighborhoods, prisons, and entire regions far from his original territory. Every expansion reinforced the notion that Hoover understood how to unify people under shared purpose. His alliance shifted the blueprint for organized street movements across the country. The Gangster disciples entered a period of massive growth due to his ambition, planning, and calculated discipline. Hoover entered the mid-'80s with a mindset shaped by years of prison leadership, and soon he began shifting his public image towards something cleaner. Stateville officers noticed him speaking calmly during visits while presenting himself as a reformed elder focused on progress. His messages described redemption and transformation, and many people believed he wanted a new beginning. Supporters praised his maturity as he spoke about guiding young men toward education and responsibility. He never raised his voice, yet every word carried history shaped by decades of influence. Hoover rebranded the Gangster disciples into growth and development, with a philosophy he claimed centered on unity, learning, and self-improvement. The new concept encouraged members to study, read, and pursue goals that built stronger futures. Inside prison meetings, he instructed followers to view themselves as builders of positive change. Literature distributed across GD sets promoted community advancement instead of violence. Members repeated slogans that reflected responsibility and purpose rather than street aggression. The shift helped Hoover connect with people outside the organization who wanted improvement in troubled neighborhoods. Growth and development supporters introduced nonprofit organizations designed to promote education and political awareness across Chicago. These groups held events urging young citizens to finish school and avoid criminal activity. Voter registration drives took place in neighborhoods heavily impacted by gang presence. Community rallies highlighted messages about empowerment, unity, and civic participation. Activists attended meetings with organizers who claimed to represent Hoover's reform vision. Those events created an image of transformation that appealed to reporters and social workers seeking neighborhood progress. The nonprofits established partnerships with churches that focused on creating safe spaces for youths interested in learning. Members assisted with tutoring programs and organized community cleanup days across the South Side. Leaders used Hoover's speeches to promote stability while presenting him as a man seeking redemption. His supporters broadcast letters describing his desire to uplift young men trapped inside cycles of conflict. These messages influenced families who wanted hope for their communities. Hoover appeared committed to restructuring his organization into a group promoting advancement. Growth and development leaders also pursued business opportunities that strengthened the idea of social reform. Clothing lines featuring positive symbols circulated through Chicago markets. Music ventures allowed young artists to record tracks expressing unity and ambition. These efforts introduced economic opportunities for members hoping to move away from the streets. Supporters marketed the brand with stylish designs and expressive lyrics. The GDs built their identity into something that felt creative, entrepreneurial, and forward-thinking. Political activity became another important element in Hoover's shift. Leaders encouraged Chicago residents to register for elections and participate in civic conversations. Some community organizers spoke at public events expressing respect for Hoover's new direction. They claimed he inspired neighborhoods by promoting anti-violence messages. Politicians seeking votes from Southside districts listened carefully to those voices. Hoover's name began appearing in conversations about reforming ambitious leaders trapped inside the prison system. He became known as someone who could potentially help reduce gang violence. Several activists began supporting Hoover's message after visiting him in Stateville or reading his letters. They believed he had transformed into a mentor for disadvantaged youths. Ministers described him as a thoughtful elder providing guidance. Social workers spoke about the positive influence he held over young GD members. Some scholars even studied the growth and development doctrine as a social phenomenon. This wave of support helped Hoover gain public sympathy from people who wanted change in their communities. However, cracks formed as law enforcement watched the organization closely and noticed inconsistencies within the reform message. Investigators traced financial streams flowing from street activity into business ventures linked to GD affiliates. Officers suspected that some nonprofit accounts served as fronts for moving money undetected. They noted that growth and development rallies sometimes occurred near areas where drug distribution networks operated. These observations created concern among agents monitoring Hoover's communications. Several street leaders within the organization still collected weekly revenue from operations involving narcotics trade and extortion. Reports suggested that a portion of those funds traveled into hidden pipelines connected to senior members. Money laundering operations became apparent to investigators reviewing bank records and property purchases. Some GD affiliates purchased buildings and vehicles using funds that lacked legitimate explanations. Those transactions exposed cracks in the public image Hoover projected. Behind the scenes, revenue still flowed through channels created during earlier GD expansion. Investigators also discovered that speeches about education and unity sometimes masked instructions passed through coded letters. Those letters encouraged members to stay disciplined while maintaining crew strength during turmoil. Growth and development meetings occasionally featured encrypted signals hinting at organized command structures. Some organizers referenced Hoover's teachings while discussing strategy for managing street issues. These signs alerted federal agents that Hoover's influence possibly extended far deeper than his reform narrative suggested. Law enforcement agencies believed that the reform message served dual purposes. It helped create positive public perception while also maintaining loyalty from thousands of members. Investigators suspected Hoover still guided operations discreetly through coded messages and controlled visitors. His public speeches about peace contrasted sharply with revenue patterns, showing large sums moving through GD networks. Agents grew more attentive as they examined phone logs, visitor lists, and financial trails. As Hoover's reputation grew, federal agencies prepared for deeper investigations. The FBI began building a long-term strategy aimed at uncovering communication methods connecting Hoover to the streets. They studied visitor patterns and analyzed subtle language in recorded phone calls. Unknown to Hoover's supporters, undercover operations already started gathering evidence linking him to organizational activity. Agents slowly constructed a case aimed at dismantling the GD structure he carefully built over decades. The tension between public reform and hidden power created questions for investigators seeking clarity. They wondered if Hoover had truly shifted or if he simply adapted his leadership into something harder to detect. Each nonprofit project, clothing brand, and community rally strengthened his image, yet financial irregularities suggested something different. The contrast shaped federal suspicion and pushed agencies to dig deeper into Hoover's world. Meanwhile, Hoover continued guiding growth and development supporters toward goals that blended community uplift and strategic discipline. He reminded followers to stay unified, speak clearly, and carry themselves with dignity. His messages encouraged self-control during street situations and respect during internal meetings. That guidance encouraged members to stay loyal to his teachings despite outside pressure. Many GD members believed wholeheartedly in his transformation and wanted to build futures away from violent paths. Still, agents monitoring his communications believed something larger existed under the surface. They listened for clues hidden inside polite conversations and letters filled with inspirational language. They studied every visitor who entered Stateville, seeking to understand motives behind messages delivered to Hoover. A massive federal operation slowly took shape, with the agents committed to uncovering the truth. The investigation gathered momentum quietly, without attracting attention from the organization. Hoover's reform era introduced an image of redemption that captivated journalists, social leaders, and church members. Many believed his transformation represented possibility for young men losing their paths across Chicago. Yet federal authorities believed his influence remained powerful inside both legitimate and illegitimate networks. The mask of reform covered something deeper, and investigators prepared to lift that mask soon. Their surveillance already stretched across Chicago as they studied Hoover's words carefully, waiting for the right moment to strike. Federal concerns surrounding Hoover's influence grew stronger through the early 90s, and soon multiple agencies teamed up to study the gangster disciples. The FBI joined forces with the Chicago Police Department, the DEA, and the IRS to create a task force targeting the organization's hidden financial and communication networks. Agents named the investigation Operation Headache, since Hoover's leadership created major frustration for authorities searching for clarity. This multi-agency team planned carefully while collecting information across several neighborhoods, prisons, and business fronts. They wanted to dismantle the GD empire through evidence rather than assumptions. Investigators watched GD activity across Chicago's south and west sides, studying street movements from 75th to areas near Cabrini Green. They noticed how crews handled operations with precision that resembled formal corporations. These agents found unusual banking patterns, unexplained cash flows, and coded messages exchanged between members. Many financial records connected to growth and development charities raised questions about legitimacy. Detectives grew convinced that Hoover still commanded major parts of the organization from inside Stateville. That suspicion pushed the task force to explore new investigative methods. Undercover agents approached individuals connected to GD operations and persuaded some to provide information quietly. These informants explained how messages traveled between Hoover and street leaders. They shared details about meetings, earnings, and internal discipline procedures. Some insiders flipped after facing serious charges that carried long sentences, and they offered information hoping for reduced penalties. Agents documented their statements while cross-checking details with street observations. Those flipped insiders helped map the GD hierarchy with surprising accuracy. As the investigation deepened, agents reviewed Hoover's prison visits carefully. They studied patterns involving visitors, gifts, letters, and legal conversations. During these visits, Hoover spoke carefully while looking confident and calm. He believed he was protected by distance and coded language used by those who delivered messages. However, federal agents developed a tactic that allowed them to monitor his communications without interrupting the visit system. They placed micro-transmitters into the visitor badges worn by Hoover's associates during each visit. These badges appeared ordinary to the visitors who wore them without suspicion. The transmitters recorded conversations between Hoover and his guests as they sat across from each other during monitored visits. Agents listened from surveillance rooms, while Hoover outlined instructions like a man fully aware of his influence. He asked questions about drug spots operating across Chicago and inquired about who managed certain areas. He requested updates about corners near 71st, 79th, and 55th. He gave orders about discipline from members who failed to meet expectations. Hoover demanded accountability from leaders who struggled to manage crews effectively. These recordings revealed the internal structure of the GDs in unexpected detail. Hoover also discussed young recruits entering the organization, including kids involved in street activity. He spoke about teaching them structure, discipline, and unity under the GD banner. These references disturbed investigators who believed minors remained heavily impacted by GD operations. Agents took notes while listening to Hoover describe how members should handle disputes, collections, and enforcement. His tone stayed calm throughout, and he occasionally mentioned leaders by name while reviewing their performance. These conversations provided federal agents with enough material to understand Hoover's ongoing leadership role. Operation Headache accumulated evidence that demonstrated the GDs operated with higher organization than previously understood. Agents studied thousands of recorded conversations captured through the micro-transmitters. They also monitored phone calls from prison where Hoover communicated using coded language. These recordings contained references to earnings, members, discipline, and numbers associated with street activity. Investigators combined data from visitors, phone logs, and financial records to form a detailed case. That case painted Hoover as an architect, guiding a large criminal organization from within prison walls. In 1995, federal agencies prepared to execute coordinated raids across Chicago and neighboring cities. These raids targeted top GD leaders who collected one-day payments and enforced Hoover's directives. They scheduled the operation for early morning hours, when most suspects remained inside their homes. SWAT teams moved through Inglewood, South Shore, Roseland, and parts of West Inglewood simultaneously. Officers took dozens of high-ranking GD members into custody within minutes of each other. Operation Headache delivered a heavy strike that shocked several communities accustomed to regular GD presence. These coordinated raids seized weapons, ledgers, cash, and communication records from multiple residences. Agents recovered documents containing coded instructions believed to originate from Hoover. They also confiscated materials tied to GD business fronts, including receipts and records showing unexplained transactions. Many GD members faced charges including racketeering, conspiracy, money laundering, and drug distribution. The arrest created panic within the organization since leaders responsible for maintaining street stability now face federal prosecution. Reporters broadcast live images of suspects leaving their homes in handcuffs during the raids. The first wave of trials began soon after the raids and exposed the gangster disciples' internal structure publicly for the first time. Prosecutors presented witnesses who described rank systems, earnings, discipline procedures, and communication lines from street to prison. Jurors learned about one-day payments and how those funds traveled through trusted members. They heard about lieutenants, governors, and regents who managed operations across neighborhoods. Prosecutors also played audio from micro-transmitter recordings that outlined Hoover's involvement. Reporters published transcripts showing Hoover's senior role within the GD organization. The testimony shocked many Chicago residents who believed the reform movement had fully replaced street operations. Journalists covering the trial wrote lengthy articles describing the size and complexity of the GD structure revealed during courtroom sessions. Families connected to GD members feared the arrests would destabilize neighborhoods. Prosecutors relied on multiple cooperating witnesses who spoke about earnings, punishments, and orders. Agents displayed charts showing how Hoover's teachings guided decisions from Stateville to distant cities. These presentations built a narrative that connected Hoover directly to street activity. While the first wave of convictions injured the GD's external operations, the government wanted Hoover at the center of a separate trial. They believed Hoover directed decision-making through coded communications, visitor conversations, and trusted intermediaries. Federal prosecutors started preparing a major case aimed at proving Hoover's leadership beyond reasonable doubt. They studied thousands of recordings searching for statements that connected Hoover to criminal activity. Each conversation became important since the government wanted to show direct influence rather than indirect support. Prosecutors prepared to play recordings that captured Hoover reviewing drug operations and addressing problems within the organization. They organized financial documents showing unusual transactions linked to GD properties and businesses. They documented witness testimony explaining Hoover's chain of command and internal discipline structure. These materials became essential parts of the case federal attorneys built against Hoover. Reporters anticipated a major trial that would shape Chicago history. As prosecutors moved closer to trial, tension increased inside the gangster disciples. Members realized investigators possessed strong evidence that reached into every layer of the organization. Hoover followed updates through legal conversations and understood the seriousness of the situation. The government aimed to establish that he led the GDs from Stateville while promoting growth and development publicly. Each recorded conversation placed pressure on Hoover's defense team. The recordings played a central role in the government's argument. Federal authorities prepared subpoena lists, documents, and audio evidence for the courtroom. Jury selection started with heavy security due to the high-profile nature of the case. Prosecutors planned to reveal Hoover's recorded conversations slowly, letting jurors absorb the weight of his influence. They wanted each audio clip to build suspense, showing his calm voice guiding operations across Chicago. Those recordings became the backbone of the federal argument. Reporters prepared headlines that would soon echo across the country. The stage stood ready for the most defining trial of Hoover's life. The federal courthouse in Chicago stayed packed during Hoover's 1997 trial, and reporters filled every available seat once proceedings began. Prosecutors opened with the recordings gathered through Operation Headache, letting jurors hear Hoover's calm voice delivering instructions from Stateville. Each clip played slowly across the silent courtroom, while agents explained how those messages traveled through visitors and coded channels. Jurors listened as Hoover asked about earnings, street discipline, and activity on several corners across the South Side. Those recordings made the room feel tense since his leadership sounded measured rather than reckless. Prosecutors introduced conversations where Hoover discussed strategies for maintaining order inside the organization. Some clips referenced punishments for members who ignored rules or disrespected higher-ranking leaders. Other recordings showed Hoover evaluating performance among different crews operating under the GD banner. Jurors heard him mention individuals by name while describing expectations for specific neighborhoods. Every clip painted a picture of someone controlling operations carefully despite serving a long sentence. Prosecutors argued that these recordings proved Hoover's authority clearly. Former members of the Gangster Disciples stepped into the witness box and described the group's chain of command. They explained the ranking system involving board members, governors, coordinators, and soldiers. Witnesses outlined how instructions traveled from Hoover to senior members and eventually reached crews operating across multiple cities. Some described one-day payments and explained how money traveled through trusted associates. Others outlined discipline procedures used when individuals violated rules. Their testimony helped jurors understand the structure that supported Hoover's influence. Witnesses also described Hoover's respected status within the organization and the loyalty he commanded across neighborhoods. They spoke about meetings where members referenced Hoover's teachings as guiding principles for decision-making. Several witnesses shared moments when disputes were settled based on messages passed from Stateville. Their statements reinforced the idea that Hoover maintained consistent control even without direct contact with the street activity. Prosecutors used this testimony to support the recordings already played. Hoover's legal defense argued that growth and development represented a legitimate reform movement focused on education and empowerment. They said Hoover encouraged young men to reject violence and pursue stability. Defense attorneys presented letters where Hoover spoke about self-improvement and community uplift. They displayed nonprofit documents and clothing brand materials promoting positive themes. Attorneys argued that Hoover could not control street operations from inside a maximum security prison. They maintained that authorities misinterpreted coded language used during his communications. The defense also suggested that prosecutors misunderstood Hoover's intentions when referencing discipline and structure. They said he sought to guide members toward peaceful resolutions rather than violent actions. Hoover's attorneys presented supporters who praised his reform message during community events. Ministers testified about their interactions with Hoover and described him as a man committed to transformation. These accounts attempted to counter the narrative created by federal recordings. Prosecutors responded by replaying key recordings where Hoover asked about activities linked to revenue and enforcement. They highlighted his calm tone while addressing matters connected to drug distribution and internal discipline. Those recordings revealed him asking for status updates from leaders managing specific territories. Jurors watched as transcripts displayed text matching each voice clip. The contrast between reform messages and recorded conversations led many jurors to question Hoover's intentions. Jurors reacted strongly to recordings where Hoover assessed performance among younger members entering the organization. They heard him mention training new recruits and discussing expectations for discipline. Some jurors took notes while listening, recognizing the structured leadership reflected in his words. These clips became essential pieces of evidence showing Hoover's ongoing authority. Prosecutors emphasized that no one else inside Stateville received similar deference from visitors or members. As the trial continued, the courtroom atmosphere grew heavier with each witness and recording. Prosecutors argued that Hoover maintained control by using coded messages disguised as reform. They displayed financial documents showing unusual transactions connected to GD affiliates. They introduced letters containing subtle signals, instructing members to maintain discipline across various regions. The case built steadily, piece by piece, while jurors absorbed every detail. Hoover's defense team attempted to explain the meaning behind coded terms, arguing they referenced organizational order rather than criminal intentions. They insisted that prosecutors misread cultural language used within the community. They said Hoover wanted peace and believed structure helped prevent violence among youths. Despite this argument, prosecutors highlighted how certain phrases consistently matched actions recorded in other evidence. That pattern influenced jurors evaluating credibility on both sides. Closing arguments summarized two competing narratives. Prosecutors described Hoover as a leader running a criminal organization from inside prison while promoting reform publicly. The defense painted him as a misunderstood figure striving to lead people toward unity and education. Jurors carried those arguments into deliberation while reviewing key recordings. They studied transcripts showing Hoover's detailed involvement in organizational matters. They evaluated testimony describing his influence from trusted insiders. After lengthy deliberation, jurors returned guilty verdicts on all counts, including racketeering, drug conspiracy, and continuing criminal enterprise charges. The judge addressed Hoover directly while explaining the seriousness of leading a large-scale organization from inside prison. He handed down 6 life sentences without the possibility of parole. Reporters documented the moment as one of the most significant gang-related convictions in Chicago history. Families of victims watched quietly while deputies escorted Hoover from the courtroom. Hoover's transfer to ADX Florence followed soon after sentencing. That facility housed some of the most isolated inmates within the federal system. Hoover entered a new environment where communication became severely restricted. His world shifted into a concrete cell, designed to limit movement and contact. This transition marked the beginning of another chapter in his long story. ADX Florence stood deep in Colorado, with hard concrete stretched across every direction and silence sitting heavy inside every hallway. That supermax prison kept inmates inside small cells nearly all day, with almost no contact. The space felt cold, bright, and unforgiving, and those conditions tested every mind that entered. Hoover arrived carrying decades of influence, yet ADX pressed him into a world built to erase power slowly. He walked into a place where movement stayed controlled and time moved differently. Hoover adjusted to supermax living while studying his limits carefully. Guards monitored every step he took, and cameras captured nearly every moment. He learned the schedule, understood the routines, and adapted to the strict isolation pushed onto every inmate. His new cell held almost no sound except for echoing footsteps from staff moving through corridors. Hoover stayed calm while adjusting to this new reality, and he tried testing boundaries like someone unwilling to fade quietly. He watched how officers reacted whenever he tried speaking with inmates during controlled movement. Early incidents shaped his reputation inside ADX, including a yard situation where an inmate got assaulted by several prisoners. Hoover reportedly helped restrain the injured man to prevent further harm, and guards noted his involvement in reports. Staff also found a small shank near his cell, which caused immediate concern about possible violence. Hoover denied ownership while officers documented the incident thoroughly. These events reminded officials that his presence required special attention. He carried too much history for them to relax their guard. Communication limits increased sharply, yet Hoover searched for ways to send messages outside his cell. Officers discovered coded notes inside dictionaries passed between inmates. Those notes contained references hinting at organizational matters that troubled investigators. One message read, "I'm ready to handle your business," which raised alarms about his intentions. Staff believed he wanted to stay connected with individuals beyond ADX walls. Those discoveries led to strict reprimands from administrators who feared any sign of coordinated communication. Prison officials banned several conversations after hearing Hoover discuss topics they viewed as potential threats. They monitored his phone calls and restricted subjects he could address during legal visits. Hoover attempted to share thoughts connected to old teachings, which officers interpreted as attempts to update the blueprint used by members on the streets. Administrators removed materials they believed supported structured communication. These actions intensified his isolation further. Despite strict conditions, Hoover's supporters insisted that he transformed into an elder, seeking redemption. Family members said he wanted peace and spoke only about unity during phone calls. Advocates argued that Hoover no longer held interest in the gangster disciples and preferred growth for younger generations. Ministers described him as reflective and soft-spoken during approved interactions. They believed his influence could help calm violence if he ever regained freedom. Prison officials disagreed completely, stating that Hoover remained a major threat due to his history and intelligence. They referenced the coded dictionary messages and suspicious conversations. Officials argued his leadership required full restriction since he influenced thousands before entering ADX. They maintained that releasing him posed danger to public safety. These conflicting perspectives shaped ongoing debates about his status. Hoover's name eventually gained traction in hip-hop culture as artists referenced his story frequently. Rappers admired his rise from Chicago blocks into national influence. Songs mentioned his leadership, discipline, and structure, which shaped many movements. Young listeners learned his name long after his incarceration. This popularity inspired the Free Hoover movement, which spread through online communities. Supporters across the country wore clothing referencing his name and demanded his release. The campaign expanded quickly due to major artists who referenced his story publicly. Hoover's influence lived through music, community conversations, and social media, keeping his legacy alive long after isolation began. His supporters viewed him as a symbol of potential transformation. Critics viewed him as a dangerous organizer whose ideas still carried power. ADX Florence remained the location where these debates centered while Hoover reflected on his long history. Efforts to secure Hoover's release increased during the late 2010s. As activists, church leaders, and community organizers pushed for reconsideration. His family led several campaigns calling for humane review of his sentence. They partnered with national voices including Kanye West and Drake, who mentioned Hoover repeatedly during concerts and interviews. These artists argued that Hoover changed and could guide younger generations toward discipline and peace. Their involvement magnified public attention and pushed Hoover's case into mainstream conversation. President Donald Trump granted a federal commutation connected to Hoover's drug-related conspiracy sentence in 2021. That decision removed one layer of his legal penalties, yet it did not free him since he still carried a life sentence from Illinois tied to the murder of William Pookie Young. That state sentence kept him locked inside ADX despite federal adjustments. Supporters celebrated the commutation as a step forward, but understood that major obstacles remained. Hoover's attorneys continued filing requests for relief while citing his age and declining health. Illinois parole boards reviewed Hoover's petitions multiple times and rejected each request. Officials argued that Hoover still held potential influence within the Gangster disciples due to his leadership history. They said releasing him might spark renewed activity among members who viewed him as a symbolic figure. Prosecutors also voiced concerns about his past involvement in organized operations that stretched across several cities. These arguments convinced the board that Hoover should remain in custody. His legal team presented letters describing his peaceful intentions, yet officials remained unconvinced. Hoover's legacy created a complex narrative since people interpreted his story differently depending on their experiences. Some Chicago residents viewed him as a strategic elder capable of guiding youths away from violence. They believed his organizational mind could help stabilize neighborhoods struggling with conflict. Ministers and activists claimed he carried wisdom that might help solve modern issues facing Chicago's South Side. His supporters described him as someone transformed through decades of confinement. Others viewed Hoover as a mastermind who built one of the largest street organizations in the country and profited from illegal activity. They argued that his teachings shaped an empire responsible for significant harm across multiple states. Former law enforcement officials maintained that he remained a threat due to his ability to inspire loyalty. They saw his calm leadership as a tool that expanded operations rather than reduced violence. That contrast shaped debates about whether society could safely release him. The paradox surrounding Hoover's story complicated public conversations since his influence spread across several generations. Many younger people learned his name through hip-hop references without fully understanding the history behind his rise. They saw him as a legendary figure connected to power, discipline, and resilience. Older residents remembered the violence tied to the Gangster disciples during their peak and carried different interpretations. This divided perception made it difficult to form unified opinion about Hoover's future. Hoover currently sits inside his ADX cell with little contact outside designated times, reflecting on a lifetime shaped by leadership, conflict, and ambition. The concrete walls around him hold decades of stories tied to Chicago streets, prison yards, and legal battles. He remains a man who once controlled thousands, yet now moves within strict isolation. Supporters continue fighting for his release, while officials remain focused on public safety. His future remains uncertain as legal teams prepare new petitions. His influence shaped countless lives, yet his path now rests in the hands of systems still debating his fate. The man who once guided a massive organization waits inside ADX Florence for decisions that may never arrive. His story continues without closure, leaving many people wondering how it will finally end.